but we're very pleased to welcome former First Minister. Is that what they called in Wales? Is the same as Scotland? I don't know. I'll ask him. Carwyn Jones. Hello, sir. How are you?
Hey, Bob, how you doing? You're dead right. There is First Minister. There's three of us: Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
Now, before we do anything, and we'll come to we've got a load of time, don't worry, we can go through all different kind of subjects here, but how come that it strikes to me that the Welsh Parliament, which I'm guessing is in Cardiff, is it? I'm presuming it's in Cardiff, and I'm sure it's a beautiful building, but they attain this kind of level of devolution, and the Parliament's set up, and they got down to business, and they very quietly have got on with it. As opposed to the Scottish Parliament, which is kind of, to me, sometimes you kind of think, all right, hang on a minute, you stay with your own bit, you do your lot, okay? They're a little bit more up in your face, aren't they?
Well, I suppose the difference is that in Scotland, you've got a government in Scotland and wants independence. You don't have a government in Wales that wants the same thing. And independence makes the headlines, Bob. That's what all the London media like to look at. So we've just got on with things in Wales, running the health service, running education, getting jobs into Wales. That's what it was all about at the end of the day. That's what people want to see. It's all bread and butter issues. And
how good a job, I'm talking about you and your years in charge, but in general, since devolution, since you had your own parliament, has it sounded like a perfectly sensible idea that the people who live in that part of the union should be in control of it. Has it worked according to plan?
I'll say it has. I mean, all the opinion polls show that people are very happy with it, very happy with the way the Welsh government's handled COVID, for example, compared to how the UK government's done it. And, it's what the UK is now. We're four nations at the end of the day. It's how that relationship works between all of us. We want to get on. We want to be friends, but we can't have the same sort of structure as we had in the old days, where basically all the power was centralised in London. That applies to people living in the northeast of England as well, Lancashire, Cumbria as well, in the northwest. It can't all be in London. London can't be the font of all power. You've got to make sure that people feel that they've got control over their own lives.
Well, the kind of mayoral system that they sort of mooted as being the big way around that. I don't know how successful that has been, but you have to be careful. You can't devolve everywhere, can you?
No, there are some things you wouldn't devolve. You wouldn't devolve defence, would you? We'd know our own army, and border and immigration control. That's something best done at UK level. Moving money around the UK to where it's most needed. That's got to be done at UK level. So yeah, there are some things that work better that way, but other things, they've worked far better over the past 20 years in Wales and Scotland and in Northern Ireland than they did before. All
right, we'll change the subject in a minute, but I always make a point of saying I don't know anything about politics. I'm not a political animal. We have other shows, as I'm sure everyone's aware, on this very channel where they'll stuff politics down your throat from all different directions for about 18 hours of the day. But I don't on this show. But let me give you this then. I don't know if it's the case in Wales. I don't think it is, and I'm not sure about Northern Ireland. But from the Scottish model, there's always this danger that you think, all right, Westminster was in charge of the whole thing, and then we had this devolution. Now there's Cardiff. There you go. You've got Northern Ireland. Scotland, look after your own affairs. There's always this kind of combative thing that people are saying, oh, we're doing much better than England's doing. And it's like, well, okay.
Yeah, but it's not a competition, is it? You can't just say, well, we're doing better than England here and England's doing better than us there. It shouldn't be that way.
No.
You get on with doing things in the way that you think best for your own country. I think a lot of people think sometimes in London that in Scotland and Wales we do things purely to be different. Let's be different. If England's doing X, let's do Y. We don't see it that way. We don't compare ourselves like that. England's a big country. It's on our doorstep. It's 20 times the size of Wales. And, inevitably, you've got to work very closely together. That'll always be the case. History and geography will always dictate that. But part of the problem we've got is the structure we've got at the moment creates that, that combat, if you like. Because it's not clear who does what, and everything's a little bit of a, British Constitution is a bit of a mess, and I'm not going to go into, you'd be glad to know, I'm not going to go into all that. We could do it a lot better. We could have a better system where people can get on with each other, come to agreements, talk to each other, rather than the system we have at the moment, which is basically a sort of low-level shouting match that's gone on for the past 20 years. Everybody in Britain deserves better than that.
Yeah, the impression I've got watching it from the sidelines is that I think sometimes maybe the best thing hasn't been done because people have been unwilling. Oh well, I know that's a good idea, but they thought of that. I don't want to go along with it, and I think that's against the whole point of what devolution was seen to be about. It was about, listen, we're all grown-ups. Let's all take responsibility for our own little bit, and then once a week we'll meet up and make sure we're all doing okay.
Yeah, absolutely right. No, you're bang on there, Bob. That's exactly the way the system should work. It's not about we're better than you, or we've spent more money on this than you have. That's just silly, and I never liked that when I was in the job. There's always an element of that. You just get on with doing things in the way you think best on behalf of the people who've elected you, and you work with others. You work with everybody to make sure you get things done. It's not a competition. It never has been. And unfortunately, that's the way it's been at times. But as I said, we can do a lot better. We can have a system that promotes a lot more cooperation than the system we've got at the moment, which is almost designed to create conflict, basically. And that's not what people want.
No, I don't think it is. I mean, I grew up on the Welsh borders. Here's my little, this is my interesting bit of trivia about me, Carwyn, before we go any further. I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters, all of whom are Welsh, because I grew up in Chester, and at that time, in the late 50s when I was born, there was a nice hospital in Chester, but the big hospital for women having babies was the Mailer in Flint. Mm-hmm. So when a woman felt her contractions, she got her husband to drive her to Flint, which she did. I was premature, so they didn't have time. So I was born on the English side of the walls in Chester, but my brothers and sisters were all born in Flint. And as they've got older, have become more and more proudly Welsh. I think that's what happens to people when they sort of feel themselves part of a diaspora, even though they were only there to be born, and then, at one day they were driven back. So it's. Yeah,
I tell you what, Bob, that hospital, has done a lot of good for the Welsh football team, because so many of them are Flintshire lads, and of course, one of the problems we have is if they get born in the Countess of Chester, they qualify for England as well, and that's a big area for getting players as far as Wales is concerned. But look, you are what you feel you are. There's a tale, isn't there, about Chester, that it's the same as Shrewsbury. That there's this story that if you're caught within the walls of Chester, this, don't you? After midnight, you can be shot with a bow and arrow if you're Welsh.
Well,
I don't recommend anyone tries this out. Okay, I don't think it's the law anymore.
The rule, as we were taught it at Queen's Park High School in Chester, the rule was quite simple. Mrs. Jenkins, Ruth Jenkins, who taught us Latin, it was a very specific rule. The best place to practice your archery was on the walls. Okay, because and it was fine. It was forbidden to fire arrows. Obviously, it was a mischievous, malicious act to fire arrows into the city, but it was fully acceptable to fire them out onto the meadows, because the understanding was that if there was an accident, it would only be a Welsh person that you did. That was the understanding of it, which of course. But there is a great love. You see, this is a fascinating thing. I don't know what the borders are like, the kind of Reaver country up in the north of England. But having grown up, there is a fantastic. The border community is a brilliant community, and it really does straddle England and Wales. And it's almost, I always think of it's the best of both countries is around there on the borders.
Yeah, it's a bit different to Scotland in that you've got Chester right on the border. You've got communities like Saltney, which are almost in Chester, but are actually in Wales. I think the Chester football ground, part of that is in Wales and part of it is in England. In South Wales, it's not quite the same because you've got water in the way.
Yeah, exactly.
River Severn's in the way. So people talk about about over the water, meaning England. So the link isn't quite there in the same way. But yeah, you're quite right. And at the end of the day, you are what you feel you are. We make too much of borders, I think, sometimes, and lines in the sand. At the end of the day, all across Europe, we got a shared history. We've fought each other, we've loved each other for centuries, and sometimes a line in the sand, we just make too much of it as human beings.
But it is the dividing thing at the moment in the whole political arena in this country is who are you? What are you?
Yeah,
Are you British
yeah.
or are you European? And that's
Well, I don't think you've got to make a choice, have you? Really, I mean, I take your meaning. I mean, the Brexit debate was about that, but I don't think you have to choose one identity. You can have many identities, and I don't see a great problem with that. The part of the world where you don't get a shared identity is Northern Ireland. My wife's from Belfast, and people don't really share an identity there. There's sort of a kind of emerging Northern Irish identity, but that's historically that was never the case.
No.
And for me, I'm a Welshman. I'm primarily a Welshman. But that doesn't mean I've got to, turn my back on any other identity. We make too much of flags, right? I always say to people, when you can't eat flags, right? Flags don't create jobs. Flags don't feed you. Flags at the end of the day are just symbols. What's important is that people can work with each other. They can sell to each other. They can make each other better off, and they can live they can live without war. That's we make too much of flags.
Let's talk about Wales, the country. Where are you from, Carwyn?
Well, I grew up in a town called Bridgend. It's about halfway between Cardiff and Swansea, but my family were originally from further west, right on the northwestern edge of the coalfield. So my parents came from a Welsh-speaking village, strong Welsh-speaking village, moved into an English-speaking town in Bridgend. So I had a bit of both worlds, I suppose.
Because the language is an incredible thing there. Were you behind it? What part did your government, when you were in charge, play in the whole Welsh language thing?
Well, I'm a Welsh speaker. I come from as far back as you want to go in my family. They're all Welsh speakers, and there are between 500,000 and 700,000 of us. It depends what sort of count you look at. There are lots of communities in Wales, but it's still the dominant language where you hear it all the time. Every child studies Welsh till they're 16 in school, and about 20% of kids, they'll go all the way through school learning only through Welsh. So my kids went to a comprehensive where the only subject that wasn't taught through Welsh was English. And we're used to that system, having a bilingual system, Welsh medium system, English medium system. And it's the norm in a lot of countries in Europe. You see it in Belgium, for example. You see it in parts of Spain. You see it in parts of Germany even. It's not unusual to have Switzerland, where you got 4 languages. It's quite normal for people to speak at least 2 languages across Europe. It's actually Britain that's a bit different, where you've got a lot of people who really only speak 1 language, and that's actually quite rare in Europe.
You see, it's a wonderful thing because the debate is always all that money they must spend on road signs. There's only 12 of them. There's 2 old ladies in Conways and a fella in Portmaddock. They're the only ones who can speak it. Yeah. And I'm sure there was a time.
People in the pub who turn to Welsh when you walk in. That one. Yeah.
And I'm sure there was a time when it was dying, but it must be educationally an incredibly healthy thing, because I have no knowledge of this and I have no research to back me up, but it strikes me that if as a child you're learning 2 languages, it must be much easier to then think, do you know what, I might add French to this as I know how to learn language. It must be a lot easier, surely.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, I love the bit about the signs. I mean, the cost of a sign is the metal. What you put on it is marginal after that. You put it's 2p halfpenny what you put on it. So there's no real cost there. Yeah, but I spoke Welsh first, but really I was literally 3-4 years old when I started speaking English. So I've always had 2 languages. This is normal for me. And Welsh and English are very, very different. Welsh is descended from the language that was spoken first on this island when the Romans were here. And then the Anglo-Saxons came, and English came with what became English came with the Anglo-Saxons. So English is a lot more like German, and Welsh is a lot more like French and Spanish, really. So you've got 2 very separate different languages, and it makes it much easier to pronounce things in other languages as well, especially Italian. Italian is dead easy to pronounce if you're a Welsh speaker. And a lot of the grammar and some of the words are very familiar as well, because they're Latin words. And Welsh is chock full of Latin. And for me, you get on to looking at other languages, and it's not such a big thing if you've already got 2 under your belt.
Exactly. If all you speak is English, then everything is a challenge. I don't know if I could learn another language. But if you've already grown up and you've got 2, surely that part of the equation is already sorted out for you. So I do think it's a very healthy thing. My brother's in He's in Wrexham now. He's married again and moved to Wrexham, and his kids are both fluent Welsh because they go to school there. And as you said, they learn Welsh. I mean, we don't talk to them, obviously, but no, we do. We're very
well, not in Welsh anyway.
we're very close.
Sometimes people think, that people only have that there's a limit to how much you can stick in your brain, and if your choice is, and the Victorians thought this. It's why lots of people in Victorian times didn't transmit Welsh onto their kids, because they thought they could only speak one language properly. Now we know that's not right. You can speak any number of languages fluently if you work at them. And for me, speaking Welsh didn't make me less fluent than English by any stretch of the imagination, and vice versa. The human brain's got tremendous capacity for learning things, and it's not as if you could only speak one language properly and you'll never speak the rest. In anywhere close to being fluent. That's just not the case.
The Victorians, by the way, and I learned this doing some research on Matthew Webb, the first man to swim the channels. The Victorians believed, with absolutely no argument, the top medical people informed Matthew Webb that if he tried to swim the channel, the time it took him to do it, his skin would become porous. And eventually, like a sponge, he would die because the seawater would seep in. That was accepted medical thinking in the 1880s. Yeah. So,
in the same way as people were told, if you get on a train when the trains were first starting, if you go above 30 miles an hour, you won't be able to breathe. People, because they had no experience of it, did they? In fairness, if you've got no real experience of anything, and you're trying to guess. And you're trying to guess without the kind of scientific knowledge we've got now, you're going to make wrong conclusions. There we are. It's very strange ideas and a lot of things.
While we're on the subject of trains, are you aware of a man called William Huskisson?
Yes. Is he the first one who was killed?
He was the first man. He was the Minister of Transport responsible.
He was killed by the first train, wasn't he, that ran?
He'd had a row with the Duke of Wellington and fallen into disfavour. And there were two trains, one going, I think, Manchester, Liverpool, the other coming the other way. And the Duke of Edinburgh was on the other one. And it was such a success, the line, that he thought this would be the time to go and, get back in and make my peace with the Duke. So as the train was coming, he said, I'll just pop over the track and get in and have a chat with him, because then people couldn't judge how fast the train was going.
Yeah. And it takes some doing to be killed by the only train in the world
that you've just launched and instigated.
Yes. To be honest with you, right, if you want to get remembered, well, the fact we're talking about him today is a sign of, but you're quite, the serious point here is people couldn't gauge speed.
No,
in the same way we do now, and if you're not used to how fast something's traveling, you're going to be far more. If you live in a world where things are more leisurely, you're not going to have any idea about how fast something can be when you first see it.
No, exactly. So listen, let's move on now. Because this book, this is the book. It's a wonderful book. Look at that, a very handsome portrait there on the front. Carwyn Jones, Not Just Politics. So. It's made. What's it about then? Oh, hang on a minute. No, sorry, Carwyn. I'm being told in my ear, not politely, I can tell you, not at all politely, that we'll talk about the book after the break with Carwyn Jones, Not Just Politics. So, Carwyn, we talked a little bit about Wales and the political situation. What else is it about? Is it about you?
Yeah, look, I didn't want it to be a book about politics in the main, but to be honest, there are plenty of them around. 600-700 pages worth of books that will tell you, I met this person today, and then I met another person the following day, and then I met someone else. It's not the most interesting in the world. I didn't set out to write the book, but I was asked to. Mm-hmm. And I thought, right, it's got to be a life story, not something that's not just politics. See what I did there? But not just about politics. Enough politics so that those people who are interested in it would want to read it, because basically that's been most of my life, hasn't it? Mm. But I wanted to make people have a think about, why do people go into politics? What drives them, and what's their personal life actually like? Because one of the things I found is I meet a lot of people in politics whose heads are in the clouds. Right? They've got no contact with ordinary people at all. I tell you the most ridiculous thing, Bob, is this. I was the first person ever to head up a government anywhere in the UK who went to a comprehensive from 11 years old onwards. First person. Only two of us have done that, me and Nicola Sturgeon. It shows you how far we've got to go, right? So I came from a very ordinary background, went into politics because it was something that was a commitment that I made because of what I believed in. And I just wanted people just to have an idea of what it was like. And, you know, some of the things you got to wrestle with as well in your family life, in your personal life, as well as some of the things that you had to deal with when you were, you know, when you were in the job, as it were.
All right, then. Well, here's a question. We hear about, you know, it's always a stick to beat someone with, you know, they went to Eton or what have you. Being from a comprehensive school, have there been points then in your political life when you've been aware that, in fact, people are acting differently towards each other, and you can only put that, it's not just party politics, you can only put that down to their actual background?
Yeah, look, I've come across a lot of people who went to public schools who are, you know, they're good people, right? So let's not, you know, let's not say that everybody's exactly the same. But I tell you what, there's still a real old boy network in London, in politics in Westminster. There's no question about that. And what I always say to people, I say to kids when I go to schools, don't think that because somebody went to a particular school, they're better than you, because they're not. I've dealt with them. You know, I dealt with so many of these people. They think they're better than you, but they're not. And for all the people listening out there today, just remember that. The only barrier you got is a barrier that you put up in front of yourself. Doesn't matter where you're from, doesn't matter who your parents are, doesn't matter what your job is, you're no worse than some of those people who are up there went to public schools. They just had an advantage that you didn't get. It doesn't mean they're cleverer. It doesn't mean they're better. And that's been my experience.
But by the same token, I would say this. A lot of kids who go to, you know, private schools, not the public schools as such, but private schools, who go there because that, you know, it's an expense that their parents have decided they're going to budget for and give them the best education. They can come out with the attitude, slightly it's different attitude, but the attitude that I'm not better than anyone, but no one's better than I am, which is just as healthy.
That's a good attitude.
Attitude.
That's a good attitude. I mean, we're talking here mainly about some of the older boarding schools. Yeah. Put it that way. You can't really say every single private school is exactly the same. But there's no doubt in my mind that some of the people who go to the most well-known ones, they do. You know, they're taught to think they're better. I think, right? Now they will protest that they're not. But how can we have a situation where it's now become normal for prime ministers to be drawn from a tiny section of the population in terms of their education? I mean, that can't be right, surely. It can't be right that we don't have people who've been to comprehensives in positions of leadership. And don't tell me it's because they went to comprehensives. I just don't buy that at all. And that's a real issue for us as a society. What's wrong with a society that our leaders all come from this tiny little group? Or most of them.
Okay. Of the people that you met, that you've worked with, have you, and I'm sure this is something that used to happen. I remember when I say I don't know anything about politics, I know about some of it because I love political diaries. I love Chip Shannon, I love Alan Clark and people like that. And you get the impression that people were a lot friendlier, that people that across the political divide. Alan Clark talks glowingly about some of the people who he was in complete opposition to politically, but as people had great friendships with them. Is that still something that happens?
Yes, it is. It's a bit like, you know, walking into a rugby pitch or a football pitch. Your objective is to kick hell out the other side and win, right? But once it's finished, it doesn't necessarily carry on. I mean, the difference in Cardiff is this, right? In Westminster, you've got 650 odd MPs. You can stand up and hammer somebody in the House of Commons chamber, knowing you're not going to see them for maybe months. Well, you can't do that with 60 of us in Cardiff. You're going to bump into the person you've just had a right go at outside. So that tends to be a bit of a natural break, I suppose, on some people. But you know, for me, it's always been it's hammer and tongs. You know, when you're on your feet, but you don't have to carry it on outside. I get on well with plenty of people in other parties, but we all know that, you know, once you're on the pitch, if I can put it that way, different rules apply.
It always comes down to rugby, doesn't it, with you people?
Well, rugby or football. I mean, we can. These days in Wales, we can talk about both with, you know, equal pride. There we are.
Okay, so and what's just we're finishing it off now. Let's see, it's Carwyn Jones, not just politics. It's headline books, 20 quid. There you go, 20 quid and worth every word. What's next? What are you up to now?
Well, we got an election in May. I won't be standing again. It's time to move on now. I don't like the idea of staying in politics for 30 or 40 years. You know, I've done it for 22. That's enough. Someone else deserves a go now. I have a few other things, bit of broadcasting, bit of work in business, bit of work with Aberystwyth University as a law professor there. I did a law degree originally. So yeah, a bit of a mixture really. So we'll see. Yeah, we'll see what happens in the future. I can't retire. I'm 53, so I'm a long way off any kind of pension. So I've got to carry on working. And yeah, I don't know. Listen, one of the things I found, right, is when I stopped being First Minister in 2018, I was given a list of things around the house I hadn't done for years on the basis that I'd do it when I had time. I'm still going through that list, Bob, I tell you.
Carwyn Jones, get on with it. Lovely to talk to you. You listen to Bob Mills on talkRADIO.